It's a black tie day here at Have It Out with Galloway in commemoration of last night's massacre in Rafah in the concentration camp called the Gaza Strip. No one has ever seen anything quite like it. Of course, things very like it have happened before and also elsewhere, but nobody has been able to watch live as a massacre of refugees in tents should take place. And what a massacre. Children burned to death, scorched like burnt offerings. Children beheaded with limbs amputated. Women and children slaughtered almost without number. No one yet knows how many people will have perished in the tent massacre that has just occurred in Rafah. But however many it is, and when we add in those severely wounded, maimed, mutilated, with no hospital there to treat them, a complete siege on the Gaza Strip, with disease running wild, hunger in their bellies, these innocent refugees were massacred by us. Sure, the rockets were fired by the Israeli Air Force, but those rockets were given, and the airplanes that fired them were given by the United States of America. And overflying them was a spy plane of the British Royal Air Force, which had taken off from a British Royal Air Force base in Akrotiri in Cyprus. Without any parliamentary approval, I would know I'm a member of the parliament, at least until the end of this week, and without any informed consent by the British people, we are now implicated in one of the worst war crimes, one of the gravest crimes against humanity since the Second World War. Because it's not just the fearsome firepower, it's not just the blanket Western diplomatic, financial, and cultural support for Netanyahu's bloodlust murder gang in power in Tel Aviv. It's not just that. It's that the victims were like fish in a barrel being murdered. The people of Gaza have nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. Even walking out into the waves, into the sea, would see them massacred by Israeli gunboats just offshore. There has never been a case like this, at least not since the Warsaw Ghetto and the Nazi atrocity against the Jews of Poland. There's never been an atrocity like this because there's never been nowhere to run, nowhere to hide, just huddle with your children under a tent and be massacred at will. Can you imagine the imbalance in this? The Palestinians have no air raid shelters. They have no anti-aircraft capacity. They have no navy. They have no air force. They have no army. They have only themselves. There are billions in the Arab and Muslim armies around the world, of course, some of them lying just across the border. But no one has come to the side, to the aid of these refugees who are an international legal responsibility. Because they are refugees, they are the responsibility of the United Nations itself. A United Nations in which, even after last night, Israel still sits as a full and participating member. The highest court in the world, the ICJ, the International Court of Justice, to which Israel is a signatory, ordered Israel to cease and desist from its armed assault on a tent city of 1.3 million people, which last night entered history, never to be forgotten. The ICC have asked for arrest warrants for the people who carried out last night's crime, but it did not dissuade them, because Netanyahu knows what you in your heart know, that there is one law for the rest of the world, and there's a different law for Israel. We'll be discussing this on Have It Out with Galloway this very day. My guest this evening has been a friend of mine for 40 years. He's not just Palestinian, he's from Gaza. He's from a refugee camp in Gaza. Scores of his relatives are under this bombardment. He was, for a time, the last Arab journalist. He's been joined in recent years by a new generation of Arab journalists, but those days when he stood aloft as the last Arab journalist will never be forgotten by anyone who plies this trade, who values this trade of honest journalism. Nowadays, he's the editor-in-chief of al-Youm. He is, of course, Abdel Bari Atwan, and he joins us now. Abdel Bari, it's almost otiose for me to offer you my condolences, because I've been doing that regularly for 40 years. But however painful it was to all right-thinking human beings watching what we saw last night, it has to have been even worse for you. Tell us your thoughts in the morn of such an horrific war crime.
George, thank you very much for having me in your program. I'm really proud of you and your friend, and your friendship, and your struggle with the people like the Gazan in particular, and also all those suppressed people all over the world. George, I didn't sleep last night simply because I was really trying to get any news about my family there in Rafah. You know, they were displaced between 3 to 4 times, and also millions of people like them on Rafah when they took refuge, hoping that they will save their life from the Israeli bombardment, Israeli massacres. But the Israeli actually they sent 8 missiles to a refugee camp there, to tents, as you mentioned in your introduction. Tents, imagine that, to use 8 missiles. People were really, grilled on these tanks and these, tents, because, they don't know what to do. The Israelis are not hitting bunkers. They are not hitting, skyscrapers. They are not hitting, they are hitting, tents. Imagine that. I was personally born in a tent, and I know what is tent. And those people are starving at the same time. Nothing. There is no human aid to them because, the Israeli blocked Rafah border crossing. So they don't have anything. And so starving, and then, missiles to hit them. So this is the situation there. I don't know what happened to my family. I don't know what happened to my friends. I don't know what happens to my relatives. Until now, we don't know, because there is no internet. There is no electricity. There is no water. There is no food. Nothing at all. It is a concentration camp, as you mentioned. Even the concentration camp is much better than what the Israelis are doing on Gaza Strip.
Well, the testimony that you've just given is extremely powerful, and it's worth recapping. These were missiles fired at people in tents who were already starving and who have for 7 months had no running water, no hygiene, no privacy, no hospitals now to treat those that were not killed but merely mutilated in this attack last night. I think we can say that this is unprecedented, certainly in modern British political history, modern world political history rather, because normally in conflict, it is possible for the civilians to flee. But here, all entries and exits are controlled by those firing the missiles, isn't it?
George, you know, as you mentioned, they don't know where to go. They said to them, go to Rafah. You will be safe there. So they went to Rafah. More than a million and a half, a million of those refugees. Originally, they were refugees in Gaza for the last 75 years. So they went there to stay with their relatives, with their tents everywhere, hoping that the Israeli wouldn't bomb them, wouldn't kill them, and wouldn't commit massacres as they did in Gaza itself, or in Jabalia, or in Beit Hanun, or in Nusayrat. They believe the Israeli, and they went to Rafah. I'll give you one example, and I hope the listener will understand what I'm saying. You know, I have a cousin in Rafah. He had about a hundred of his relatives and also other people who he knows. They came to him. They took refuge in his flat, which is very small one. He said to me, imagine 100 people will go to the toilet in the same time in the morning. How can just only one toilet for 100 people? So this is the situation. And as I said, no food, no electricity, no water, nothing at all. So the Israelis are really committing, it's another Dresden taking place in Gaza. And there is no place to go because they are in a cage, as you mentioned this expression a lot of times in your program. So the Gaza is only 150 square miles. We're about 2.5 million living there. There is no woods, there is no mountains, there is nothing at all. And there is even, there is no shade in order to protect themselves. So the Israelis are committing this massacre. And why? Why they do it? You promise those people to be safe, and they are civilian, and they are children. I couldn't see the pictures, honestly, on television. I shut my eyes because it is horrible. I never seen something like that. Amputated limbs, hands, legs, and there is no hospital to go to. The problem is they just, have you ever, George, read in any history that, the hospital were bombed? About 24 hospitals destroyed completely by the Israelis. So the people, they cannot go to a hospital. So they cannot find any medical aids. And, the border crossing is closed completely. Even the Israeli prevented these medical aids, medical medicine, or other things to reach them. Doctors are killed or arrested by the Israeli, and the hospital is completely empty. This is the situation there. Those are people, this is the most moral army on earth, the Israeli army. This is the only democracy in the Middle East, as they, mentioning themselves or presenting themselves to the international community. And as you mentioned, the Americans are responsible. The British government responsible, the Anglo-Saxon responsible. They are partner of these massacres because they are supplying the Israeli of these, giant bomb, the mother of all bombs, in order to destroy, the camps. Destroy mother of all bombs. The American giving the Israeli 1,000 kilometers of bomb in order to destroy tents. Imagine that. This is very, very cruel. I never heard of anything like that.
No, nothing quite like this. You asked the question, Abdel Bari, why? Isn't the answer they wanted to show the ICJ and the ICC and the Security Council once of the United Nations that they are powerless, toothless, and have no intention of finding any kind of set of teeth. This was a signal to the so-called international community and its institutions that Netanyahu will do exactly what he likes because he knows that nobody is going to stop him.
Yes, it is absolutely correct. You know, now they are giving a green light to the Israeli, the NATO, the American, the British governments, you know, the Australian, the Canadian. Oh, they are giving them the green lights in order to kill more and more and more. You know, 37,000 people, most of them, 20,000 of them are children, you know, they were massacred. And it seems, you know, they are still thirsty for more blood of the Palestinian children, or the Palestinian women, or the Palestinian young people there. That is what's happening. Why that, you know, where is the value? Where is the Western values? Where is it? Where is the freedom of expression? Why they are silent? Nobody is talking. Very few, actually, media is talking about these massacres and these, you know, atrocities which is taking place. And the other thing, yes, this is an answer to the International Court of Justice. This is the answer of the criminal courts. You know, the Israeli are challenging everybody. Nobody prevent them. Where is the American? Where is the NATO? Where is the human organization? Why they don't interfere, saying to the Israeli, enough is enough. You had blood, enough of the Palestinian blood. You know, what do you want to do to them? You know, nothing. You know, people are dying. If they are not dying by the Israeli missiles, they are dying by starvation. Imagine that in the 21st century, people are dying of starvation. You know, you cannot actually treat those people, treat those children. It is, it is really a disaster. I'm really disappointed. You know, we came to the West because, you know, we believe that they have the values, which is really justice, freedom of expression, freedom of thought. But, you know, where is it now? You know, it is a massacre taking place. Nobody is actually paying attention to it and saying to the Israeli, go on and on and on. But, you know, it will be very difficult to have peace, to have peace with those people. How can you actually have a peace with people who are committing, you know, war crimes, genocide, you know, ethnic cleansing against you? How can we trust them? How can we trust their supporter, you know, the American and the British and Europeans in particular? How can we trust them? They kept saying to us, George, look, you Palestinian, you know, talk to your enemy, shake hands with them, to negotiate, to have a state exactly like the, you know, the United Nations gave the Israeli a state, so it will give you. Okay, we believe that. We, you know, the PLO signed the agreement of Oslo, hoping that it will guide them to this independent state on 20% of historic Palestine. 30 years of negotiation, and now massacres, and about 800 settlers, 800,000 settlers on the West Bank, which is supposed to be the future independent Palestinian state.
What's the reaction across the Arab and wider Muslim world, Abdel Bari?
George, I think, you know, these kind of massacres, it wouldn't go without actually revenge. You know, the Israeli committing a grave mistake, because now 2 million Muslims all over the world, and also millions of hundreds and thousands of Christians, you know, and humans, all those people are seeing. It is now the social media. You cannot hide the facts. You cannot hide the truth. So I believe this will enlarge, you know, expand the war in the Middle East. Definitely it will happen. And I wouldn't be surprised if there are revolutions like the one on the American universities in most of the Arab world and most of the Muslim world, to topple these regimes who are staying silent and because they are scared of the United States. I think that war will be expanded. You can see Yemen now is actually entering this war. Hezbollah in South Lebanon, they are now fighting the Israeli. The same thing, the popular mobilization in Iraq, al-Hashd al-Sha'bi, are fighting the the Israeli. So instead of actually the Israeli guiding the whole region to stability, to peace, now they are actually triggering a huge war in the whole of the region. Oh, peace even today, the Israeli killed Egyptian soldier on the Rafah border crossing. And now Egypt, Egypt, 110 million population there. They are really frustrated, and they are putting pressure on their government to enter this war, to put an end to the Israeli. Israeli also occupied the border between Rafah, between Gaza and Egypt, which is, Philadelphia border. So this means that the whole of the Middle East will be unstable, and it will be a full of revenge against the Israeli. So we know that, and 15% of the international trade passed through the Red Sea. Now the Red Sea is unstable. The same thing, the Mediterranean could be also closed in front of the naval trades and for Israel and for other regions. So who is creating all this havoc? Who is creating all this problem? It is the Israeli. The Israeli, thirst for blood. That's the problem. We have to put an end to this. We have to stop those people because they are destroying the whole world, the stability of the world, the stability of people in Europe, in the United States, and everywhere in South America. So we have to move quickly in order to put an end to those people, because they will actually drag the international community for maybe a third world war, maybe more massacre, more instability, without any energy, without anything. So I think it is time to move on.
Abdulbari Atwan, Editor-in-Chief of al-Youm, our condolences from all of us here at the studio, and I'm sure, if I can speak for them, all of the audience, or most of the audience. I discover every week at this stage on the video wall that though there are people who cannot stay away, they don't at all agree with me or even like me. But that's not the important thing. The purpose of this show is so that you can have it out with Galloway. And first up to do that is Elizabeth Leslie in Aberdeen in Scotland. Elizabeth, welcome to the show. What would you like to ask?
Thank you, George. What I'd like to talk about is I supported a political party in Scotland. It was a Scottish Family Party until it was pretty obvious that they weren't going to acknowledge who was pulling the strings, or at least some of the strings, in terms of Agenda 2030, United Nations, et cetera, et cetera. So I left that party because of that. But I would like your opinion as to how we can get out of the clutches of these tyrannical organizations that really are thrusting a lot of the negative issues on our society at this time, in all Western countries at the same time. Just wondered what you thought, George.
Well, it's an interesting question, and indeed a big one. I'm someone who is pro-life, as they would describe it. I'm astounded that so many people who describe themselves as pro-life don't seem to give a damn about the tiny children being massacred in Gaza. It's like they're pro-life in theory, but if the children are born in the wrong place to the wrong people, then they don't mind the termination of the life of children. Even in some horrific footage I saw last week of an unborn child that was literally blown out of his mother's womb when she was destroyed by an Israeli shell. But to your point, I think that there is a calculated, orchestrated campaign to destroy traditional values in the West. Of that, I'm sure. Family values, let's call them as a rubric. Family values, patriotism, the community and civic values. There's an attempt to atomize everybody in society so that the only thing they have in common with anybody else is that they are consumers of the products of the increasingly small in number multinational corporations. And so the denigration, the degradation of traditional values is definitely long underway. Now, I don't know to what extent the United Nations are involved, but all these other letters, three-letter words, WEF, WHO, and the rest, they have all played their part in this disintegration of society. And George Soros's money fuels much of it. I'm on the receiving end right now, today, of a campaign from an organization funded by George Soros. I don't know where he lives now or if he lives anywhere. One of the characteristics of these individuals is that they call no place home. They don't feel any place is their home. They are the ultimate cosmopolitans. They are today in New York, tomorrow in Geneva, they're in Paris, they're in London, and they are increasingly influential in all of these places. You and I suspect, Elizabeth, are the people of somewhere. We are rooted in our communities, our society, our wider family, and so on, and we like it that way. And we are determined to defend that. How do we get out of their clutches? Well, the very first thing you have to do is vote against the politicians who have taken us down this road, and make sure that in the social media and in the public sphere, their ideas of liquidation, really, of country, of community, of family are contested. Elizabeth, thanks for getting us off to a good start. Let's go to Milton Keynes. Shakila Bibi in Dudley. Go ahead, Shakila.
Due to all the propaganda and lies on the back of October 7, which is why this plausible genocide is meant to have taken place, do you think now, with what happened last night in Rafah, with the massacres taking place and the videos of the beheaded babies and limbless bodies we were shown, do you think this is enough for our government to change its stance on what's happening and actually hold Israel to account and stop supporting them? And if not, can our parliament, can our MPs and our elected members here actually hold them to account and issue arrest warrants, ask for arrest warrants to be issued, because they're taking us all into supporting this genocide? So will that MPs that are not calling for a ceasefire also not be complicit to genocide?
Yes, I believe that the British government and the British parliamentary opposition are complicit. I mean, legally complicit, prosecutably complicit in the genocide, because they have acted as weapons suppliers. They have used our brave airmen to overfly Gaza on spy missions to identify targets, presumably, which Israel then acts upon. There would appear to be no other reason for 200 such spy missions being flown by the British Air Force over Gaza over the last 7 months. 1,000 hours of overflying must have been for a purpose. And so I think the British government, the opposition, and the media, which has acted as an active collaborator for what will turn out, I'm sure, to be universally adjudged, historically adjudged, crimes against humanity, and war crimes are all culpable. And I pointed that out to some media outlets today that were covering up what happened in Rafah last night and swallowing the patently, grotesquely false claim that this was an attack on Hamas militants, when we were all watching the headless children on our screens. We were all watching the children with no legs on our screens. They were still saying and implying that it was justifiable, that this was an attack on Hamas militants. Our parliament has let us down. I should know, for the last 90 days or so, I've been in it. If I'm re-elected to it, I hope it is alongside more people who think like you and think like me. And then we'll be able to begin more effectively to try and hold whoever is in power after this upcoming general election on July the 4th. We'll be able to hold them to account, maybe change their ways. But if you ask me, will the videos from last night change the view of the British government? I have to tell you, it's my sad duty to tell you that I'm pretty sure they wouldn't even have looked at the footage that kept us awake, and all right-thinking people awake last night. Wow, here's a name to conjure with. My former parliamentary colleague, Lembit Opik, former MP for Surrey. Lembit, how are you?
Not bad at all. I'm very impressed with your consistency, sir. And I'm very pleased you're standing again. You absolutely knocked them out of the park by winning your by-election. But I've got a question for you which affects me too, if I may ask it, George.
Sure. Ask anything.
One of the reasons I suspect I lost my seat was because of my celebrity profile. I didn't intend to have one, but that's the way it was. And I lost by a fairly small majority. Now, some say that you've lost your majority, you lost your seat previously because of that, and you absolutely stormed back into the by-election. Is there a gamble in having a celebrity profile at the same time as dealing with literally life and death issues, as we have heard in the programme so far?
What a very good question. We need to agree on what celebrity was. But before I go into that, if you were in that parliament behind you now, you'd be like a bird of paradise in amongst those starlings that are in profusion on those benches. Lembit, this is the dullest, most undistinguished, most shrunken parliament I've ever been in. And I've been in parliament over a period of 37 years. When I entered parliament, now almost 40 years ago, there were 100 men and women of independent mind, of big personality, that people would come into the chamber to hear them speak. I was going to say you could count them on one hand now, but I would probably amend that to say you could count them on two or three fingers. So if you are well known, if you stand out, then they'll call you a celebrity, and people will call you and try to make you a celebrity. That happened to me in the past. Doesn't happen to me now. I can't get on mainstream television, but luckily I'm making up for it with my own media, which has a far bigger audience than the so-called mainstream media. But there is an extent to which anybody who stands out from the herd, stands out from the undistinguished mass, will be dubbed a celebrity, oftentimes actually to harm them, to damage them. Maybe in your case that worked. In my case, not yet, at least not yet finally. I think the opposite. I think that being well known, being known everywhere you go, in every place in this country, is an asset, because it means that what you say travels farther, and what you stand for gains more recognition, along with the personal recognition that you yourself get. So, for example, we both know Parliament is it's one great media platform. What you say in Parliament travels farther than what you might say on a street corner, or in a church hall, or in the Painters Union premises. The reality is, what you do and say in Parliament travels further. And therefore, it seems to me, if you're a well-known member of Parliament, what you say and do is going to make even more impact. Last word to you, though, Lembit. Feel free to disagree.
Well, actually, to use parliamentary phraseology, as a supplementary to that, it does seem to me that we now live in a world where, rather than engaging with a contrary view, the establishment seeks to cancel that contrary view. You have spoken very vociferously about the war in Gaza, when, to the great shame of the Uni Party, and I'd say Conservative, Labour, Lib Dem are certainly in that group, they actually oppose a ceasefire where the overwhelming majority of victims are civilians. I'm just wondering if you feel now we're very close to a world, Orwellian world, where rather than trying to engage in debate, which is what a free country should really celebrate, we now engage in shutting down that debate because the people in charge simply don't have a strong response.
I honestly feel that we've never been a free country, but we are less free than we are less free now than we have ever been. I put it, you may say too pungently, that the rest was always lipstick on a pig. We had a parliamentary democracy. We had a free media. People were free to protest. People were free to speak and write and think independently. People had recourse to the rule of law, an independent judiciary, policemen that you would be in no sense anxious if your child stopped one and asked the directions to somewhere. The BBC as a voice of authority in the country and the world. All of these things are now gone. They were all lipstick, which when necessary were wiped off the pig. And the pig that's left is a war pig. And all things that stand in the way of war and the powers that be, the kind of powers that Elizabeth in Aberdeen was talking about, the hegemony of the WEF, where Klaus Schwab has just bowed out. That's the good news. The bad news is that Tony Blair is his likely successor. These organizations are now ruling the roost. And increasingly, that building behind you, and the building I'm seeking to re-enter on the 4th of July, are an adornment increasingly ignored. Wonderful to see you again, Lembit. I wish that you were in there with me. Lembit Opik, former Member of Parliament. Let's go to New York City. Scott Solomon is on the line. Scott, welcome.
Thanks, George. As your very articulate guest, Abdulbari Atwan, said, Israel, which Norman Finkelstein calls the satanic state, has been murdering scores of children through starvation, through bombing, every day since October 7th. The backdrop to this, though, which I would like to point out, is that according to UNICEF, 13,400 children under the age of 5 die every day from poverty. That's 4.9 million children a year die from poverty And what I'm asking you about is my absolutely original $20 trillion a year global wealth tax design, which is called the Woodford Paula Alessandra de Castrier Cabot Lodge tax. Now, what's completely original about this tax is individuals worldwide with net assets that place them in the top 1% of the wealthy, as well as corporations with net assets in the top 3% and wealthy foundations. They only owe 1/3 of the due tax amount if they pay the tax with bank loans. So what the above design, above design, where they only have to pay 1/3 of the tax amount every year if they pay the tax with bank loans, it means the institution of the $20 trillion a year global wealth tax would be by many, many, many orders of magnitude the most lucrative event in the entire history of banking. So what would happen is, George, using the principle of divide and conquer, which the plutocracy uses so well against the downtrodden masses, would be used more effectively against the plutocracy, the global banking industry. Nothing between a banker and trillions of dollars a year in risk-free loan and securitization revenues. So the banking industry would split off, cleave away from the rest of the plutocracy, and just order the world's political flunkies to institute the $20 trillion a year global wealth tax.
Well, look, Scott, you've chewed a lot of numbers in that, and I'm not in a position to challenge any of them. I will just say that I wholeheartedly support a global wealth tax, and it would have to be global because otherwise these plutocrats would just flit from one tax haven to the next tax haven in a world where they can actually do whatever it is that they do anywhere at all. They don't keep local times. They don't care about local borders. They probably don't know which country they just woke up in. They keep on keeping on, and they keep on building a fortune, which over the last 4 years, since COVID, has accelerated rather than decelerated. The biggest corporations, the biggest owners of wealth have become fewer in number and vastly richer in their wealth. So a global wealth tax could be any number of devices, Robin Hood tax, for example, on share transactions, a tiny tax on the buying and selling of shares would yield many billions of pounds. But thanks for changing the subject somewhat. Let me go live, actually, where we've got a demonstration going on in London. I hope, if I've understood that correctly. Let's see. This is an emergency demonstration outside the Ministry of Defence, opposite number 10 Downing Street in London. Not great pictures, but it gives you a flavour of the kind of response that is arising all over the world. Let's go to London instead then, to Jim Ferguson. Jim, welcome.
Thanks very much indeed, George. It's a pleasure to be here. And just wanted to say that it was actually great to see you getting elected back into Parliament. Not everybody might agree with you, but I do agree with a great deal of what you do say. You are known for being a fearsome orator, and you can't have anything but respect for that. I've often watched you in debates absolutely destroying your opposition through articulate communications. And of course, you're a fellow Scot, so that's quite good into the bargain as well.
Yeah, that helps, Jim.
George, it does indeed. I have a question for you, George, but if I could maybe just make one very, very quick point. Very interesting to see people from around the world here. In my opinion, what we do have to focus on is the common enemy, and the common enemy are indeed what you've already alluded to, along with the lady from Aberdeen, and that is indeed the globalists. They come in many forms. World Economic Forum, you've mentioned Klaus Schwab, but it goes on. Council 300, Trilateral Commission, and on it goes. The World Health Organization, really just Bill Gates, and a lot of the others. But anyway, George, it's a pleasure to meet you and to be here. Let me ask you my question. I'll just need to look it back up so I make sure I get it right. Okay. You've been a vocal critic of many Western foreign policies, particularly in the Middle East. Considering the ongoing conflicts and humanitarian crisis in the region, what specific steps do you believe Western governments should take to foster peace and stability? And how would you address the criticism that your stance often aligns with authoritarian regimes? Thank you.
Well, I see the authoritarian regimes as the United States, the United Kingdom, France, and Germany in this particular crisis. I think it was a false dichotomy between democracy and authoritarian states in the first place, but it has now become absurdly dichotomous. The idea that you're a democracy, like Israel claims to be, while subjugating for more than 50 years millions of people in territory you illegally occupied by force and have refused to disgorge, to return to its rightful owners, that disqualifies you from the description democracy. You don't get to call yourself a democracy when you're doing to Rafah, to people in tents, what was done last night. I don't think, more controversial, I don't think you get to call yourself a democracy where you have to spend $1.5 billion to be the successful president of the United States of America, and where the choices, a drooling Alzheimer patient who doesn't know where he is or how his bowels are feeling, and Donald Trump. The idea that that is a democratic choice is, I think, a misnomer. The United States does not deserve to call itself a democracy, and neither does the United Kingdom, where this current election is Tony Blair versus Tony Blair. Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer are both creatures of Tony Blair. He's working both of them. It's a wonderful piece of conjuring. He wins, whoever wins. And he, behind him, lies these WEFs, Bilderberg Group, and all these Davos, and all these other organizations we were talking about with Elizabeth earlier. So, which is the authoritarian regime? Is China, Russia, Iran, where in the first case, 800 million people have been lifted out of poverty in the last 40 years, and where the standard of living of the average man, woman in China is now higher than the average man and woman in the European Union, and where the happiness index is through the roof. Does that disqualify China to be other than described as an authoritarian regime? China is quite authoritarian. I don't want to live in China. I don't want to bring China to here. But how do you measure democracy? Is it the number of times you vote for one cheek or the other cheek of the same ass? Is that really democracy? I think that these things have to be reevaluated. Iran is called an authoritarian regime, even though it has more elections than almost any country in the world, and it's about to have another one because of the tragic demise of its president. So I question the premise, Jim, of your eloquently stated question. What steps can we take? All of them would be backward steps. That's what I'd say, Jim. We need to get out of other people's countries, stop interfering in them, stop propping up tyrants, stop arming vicious warmongering regimes like the one in Tel Aviv. Just get out. Concentrate on our own people. Although London looks fine behind you, you and I both know that that's not the true face or true picture of our country. Our country is going down the drain. Our country is crumbling with millions of poor people in it, with people waiting hours for treatment in A&E, waiting years for an operation on a waiting list in the NHS. Our trains scarcely arrive on the same day that they left in a small island. We are in deep trouble as a country, and yet we continue to focus on aggression against regimes that we have dubbed as authoritarian. Let me go to Joseph Robertson in London. Joseph, welcome to the show. What would you like to say?
Ian, George, good to see you again. Well, I agree with you on many issues, and one of those is that the West needs to air a lot of its dirty laundry. But one thing that I've got to pick up on that you just spoke about is whether or not we want imported conflict in this country. And of course, if you don't want China to come here, you definitely don't want conflict from the Middle East to spill out into the UK. One of the issues we're facing as a country is uncontrolled, uncurbed mass immigration. So how would you address that? Obviously, you have your own flock to cater for in one sense, but at the same time, we're looking at waiting times going up in the NHS. We're looking at all of these issues, mainly off the back of uncontrolled immigration. So, without, again, maybe addressing the conflict that's external to the UK, how do we address that conflict that's internal?
Well, I'm totally opposed to mass immigration. I'm certainly against uncontrolled immigration, and any sane person is against illegal immigration. If a country doesn't have borders, it isn't a country at all. It's just an ungoverned space to which anyone can come and do whatever they can get away with doing. I always say only extreme liberals and extremely rich plutocrats want open borders. The latter want them because they can profit from the pool army of cheap labor, a reserve army of labor that mass immigration produces. But I'm against mass immigration for another reason. I don't believe it's right for us to take the brightest, the best, the most educated, the most innovative, the most energized people from poor countries because those poor countries need them. I am appalled to learn when I see the figures that we're leaving the people of the Philippines almost without medical professionals because they're all here. I'm against the, if you like, intellectual decapitation of poor countries by taking all of their brightest and best into our own economy. It is a false economy, of course, because what happens if, as happened with our layer of skilled Polish workers, they decide that actually Poland is doing better now, we're going back to Poland, leaving us without electricians, plumbers, joiners, builders. Our building sector was decimated because we didn't train any apprentices of our own. We didn't retain British building workers in the industry. We handed it all over to Eastern Europeans who were here under free movement of labour when we were in the European Union. And we ought to be training up our own people for these jobs. We have high levels of unemployment now. 5% is the true figure of unemployment. But if you factor in underemployment, that is to say, people either in the black economy, ducking and diving, or people doing jobs that are much less significant than the jobs they're educated to do, then it's many millions more. I want to see every person who is within our borders legally treated absolutely equally. I cannot countenance racism, bigotry, discrimination against people of color or creed that are already within our country. But that does not mean that I want to open our borders to anybody who rolls up on a rubber dinghy from Vietnam, number one, from Albania, number two, being organized by criminal gangs who make a fortune out of every dinghy and don't pay or care about the people who sink and can't swim. So I'm in favor of Britain. I'm the leader of a party called the Workers' Party of Great Britain. It's called that for a reason. We are here. We can go nowhere else. We can't live in an imagined country. We must live in the country we have, and we must try to make it better. And controlling immigration is undoubtedly a part of that. Great to see you again, Joseph. Let me go to Oxfordshire, where David Carpin is on the line. David, welcome.
Thank you, George. I've got a question on the national debt. The UK's debt now is 2.7 trillion, which is 100% debt to GDP ratio. According to the United Nations, anything over 77% is quite critical to a country. We've raised interest rates, making it more difficult to service the debt. So what would your plan be? Would you look to raise taxes? In which case, where would you raise those taxes and how much would you raise? Or would you cut costs? Where would you cut the costs and where would you make the savings?
That's a very easy ball for me to hit out the park, and I'm grateful to you for it. I would do both. I would raise taxes on the super rich, organized globally. I would do the kind of things I said in relation to an earlier question. I'd tax stock market transactions. I'd tax wealth. I'd tax windfall profits, of which there have been an abundance in the course of the pandemic and since. But most of all, I'd cut costs. And the costs I'd cut would be to stop sending our brave soldiers, sailors, and airmen into war after war after war. I'd cancel the absurd plan, a Dutch auction between the Tories and Labour as to who can waste even more of our money on weapons and war. I'd drastically cut our defence budget, including scrapping unnecessary offensive material, and I'd concentrate on a proper defence force for Britain. I'd save a bit of money by cancelling Rishi Sunak's plan to draft our 18-year-olds as conscript soldiers or YTS boys and girls or whatever it is he has in mind. So I'd raise taxes on the wealthiest people and I'd cut costs in many ways, but first and foremost on our budgets, our weapons, and our wars. I'd like to give you a longer and better answer, David, but alas, I've run out of time. My apologies to all the people on the wall that didn't get in. Please try again next week, and we'll do everything that we can to fit you in. I hope that you found that the show, Have It Out with Galloway, has lived up to its billing, has done what it says on the tin. If you want to join us, then go to our website, www.haveitoutwithgalloway.com, and you can be with me and these illustrious figures there on the show next week. Thanks for watching.